Tens of thousands of years ago, when darkness still ruled the earth, the world was home to more than one kind of human. Across waist-high grasslands, through the frozen plains of Europe, and deep within the rainforests of Southeast Asia, 6 species of humans breathed the same air, walked the same paths, and looked up at the same sky, wondering, who are we? There were no walls, no borders, no history. Only the silence of forests and the footsteps of creatures who had begun to dream. Some were tall and strong, muscles carved from stone. Some were small and agile, climbing trees like shadows. And somewhere in the far reaches of Africa, a fragile species emerged slow, defenseless, without claws or fangs to protect itself. But in their eyes burned something no other creature possessed: imagination. No one knows when the real war began. Maybe it started in a hungry winter, when 2 tribes fought for the last piece of meat. Maybe it happened one night, when a group of sapiens saw another fire burning on a distant hill and realized they weren't alone. But one by one, the others disappeared, until only we remained. And that's where the greatest mystery of humanity begins. Why did the weakest survive? Why, after millions of years of evolution, does only one voice still echo in the wind? Not the voice of the strong, but the voice of those who could dream. In the beginning, there was no destiny, only survival. The world was a battlefield of hunger, heat, and endless fear. Teeth and claws ruled the law of existence, and every creature knew its place in that brutal order. But one day, something extraordinary happened. A fragile ape took its first uncertain step. It stood upright and saw farther than it had ever seen before. That moment changed everything. Standing meant more than balance. It meant freedom. The hands that once clung to branches were now free to build, to carry, to strike. The eyes that once stared at the ground could now look to the horizon. That small act of standing turned into the most dangerous rebellion in the history of life. They began to move. Across savannas and rivers, across deserts and forests, they followed the scent of water, the trace of fire, the rhythm of the stars. Every new step carried a silent promise. We will not stop. They learned to break stones, to sharpen edges, to tear the flesh of animals stronger than themselves. Fire became their secret weapon, a tame lightning bolt that obeyed their will. Around its glow, they learned something even more powerful than fear. They learned belonging. The nights that once echoed with predators' roars now trembled with human voices. Around the fire, they shared warmth and stories. They pointed to the stars and gave them names. They began to see meaning in the chaos, order in the dark. For the first time, a creature looked at the world not just to survive, but to understand. That thought was the birth of humanity. Still, life was a constant war. For every sunrise there was blood. For every meal, a chase. Death was never far, but it taught them something the strong never learned. It taught them memory. The dead were not forgotten. Their bones became lessons. Their pain became wisdom. Generation after generation they changed. Their hands grew steady, their minds sharper, their hearts hungrier. They hunted in groups, moved like shadows, spoke in sounds that began to carry meaning. A word became a command became a plan, and a plan became power. They started to dream of tomorrow. No animal had ever done that. When they stood, they were still animals. But when they dreamed, they became something else. They became human. The earth did not notice at first. The wind still blew, the river still ran, the stars still burned. But beneath it all, a quiet storm was rising. These small beings, soft and naked, had found a new kind of weapon. They no longer needed fangs or armor. They had ideas. Ideas are invisible, but once they appear, they never die. From that moment, the world was no longer ruled by the strong. It belonged to the clever, to the curious, to those who could imagine what didn't yet exist. And so, under the silent witness of the moon, the first humans looked into the fire and saw something more than warmth. They saw the future. It would take thousands of years before that vision would burn through the forests and reshape the planet. But everything began right there, in that flicker of flame reflected in two human eyes. The day they learned to stand, they stopped being afraid of the night. The day they learned to imagine, they stopped being afraid of the gods. And from that moment on, the world would never be the same. They were small, fragile, and easily broken. The wind could kill them, the cold could starve them, and a single beast could erase an entire tribe. Yet somewhere behind their dark eyes, something began to glow. A spark. No one saw it happen. No one could have understood it. It wasn't a sound, or a tool, or a new muscle. It was a thought. The world had always been what it was. Rocks, trees, beasts, rivers, sky. But in one quiet moment, a human looked at the world and saw something more. They saw meaning. They saw story. That spark was imagination, and it was the first magic this planet had ever known. With imagination came power. Power to remember what was gone. Power to dream of what was not yet real. Power to tell a lie so beautiful that others believed it. At first it was simple, a whisper around the fire, a story about a spirit in the trees or a hunter who became a star. The story did not feed them, did not warm them, but it gave them something they had never felt before: hope. Hope is a strange kind of weapon. It cannot cut or burn, but it makes the weak stand taller and the cold nights feel shorter. One mind became two. Two became 10. A tribe began to move as one, guided not by instinct, but by idea. They could plan hunts before the sunrise, build traps they had never seen, walk to places they had never been. While the beasts slept, the humans imagined. And in that imagination, they became unstoppable. Fire no longer just cooked their food. It carried symbols. The glow on their faces was not only warmth, but the light of consciousness itself. The stories told around those fires shaped their children more deeply than any blade or tooth could. Every word carried memory. Every symbol became a bridge between minds. They no longer needed to be together to think alike. That was the moment humanity learned to share dreams. No animal could do it. Wolves could hunt together. Ants could build together. But only humans could believe together. That changed everything. Because belief is the most dangerous force in the universe. Belief can turn strangers into brothers. It can turn fear into courage. It can also turn mercy into violence. Somewhere on those plains, while the stars watched silently, imagination became ambition. They began to think not only of surviving, but of controlling. If the spirit of the forest could be pleased, maybe the hunt would be easier. If the mountain could be owned, maybe others would have to obey. Every idea carried another behind it, hidden and sharp. The spark behind the eyes was growing brighter, and the world was beginning to notice. With every story, humans became less afraid of nature, and nature became more afraid of them. Their tools grew sharper, their minds colder. They started to see patterns where there were none, faces in the clouds, gods in the fire. They built the first myths not to explain the world, but to command it. And yet, for all their power, they still felt something hollow inside. That spark that gave them stories also gave them questions. Who made us? Why are we here? What happens when we die? The beasts did not ask. The trees did not care. But the humans could not stop. They were cursed with curiosity. That curse drove them across mountains, through ice, into the unknown. It would one day build cities and send rockets into the sky, but it began with a small flame reflected in a pair of human eyes, wondering if there was something more. The world had created many creatures, but only one dared to ask why. That is how everything began. They had been walking for centuries. Generation after generation, their footprints carried them out of Africa, across deserts and frozen seas, into lands no human eyes had ever seen. The wind changed. The light changed. The world itself seemed to shift beneath their feet. And then one day, they saw something impossible. Across the valley, another fire, another tribe, another kind of human. They were not alone. At first, there was only silence. The two groups watched each other from a distance, their faces painted by the same orange glow. They shared no words, only the same instinct, curiosity and fear. The air was thick with it. Every sound was a question, every movement a warning. One took a step forward, the other mirrored it. Two species, born from the same roots, now standing at the edge of history. No one knows what happened next. Maybe they fought. Maybe they traded. Maybe they simply stared, realizing they were both reflections of the same fragile miracle. But we know this much. They were different. Neanderthals were built for strength, broad and powerful, muscles thick like ropes under their skin. They ruled the cold lands of Europe, hunters of mammoth and bison, children of the ice. The newcomers were smaller, lighter, strangers from the sun. Their bodies carried the memory of heat, their minds the spark of imagination. For a brief moment, Earth held two kinds of intelligence, two ways of being human. Imagine it. Two songs playing at the same time, two stories unfolding on the same ground, each believing it was alone. The Neanderthals shaped stone and fire. The Sapiens shaped meaning. One carved tools, the other carved myths, and somewhere between them, destiny waited. The meeting might have been peaceful at first. The Neanderthals had the strength, the Sapiens had the words. There are traces of their touch in our DNA, proof that they met not only in battle, but in blood. But balance never lasts. The Sapiens spread like wind. They filled the forests, crossed the rivers, climbed the mountains. They brought fire, language, and the most dangerous weapon of all, belief. They believed the world was theirs. To the Neanderthals, the land was home. To the Sapiens, it was a stage. One saw the earth as mother, the other as opportunity. It was only a matter of time. The Sapiens hunted better, planned deeper, dreamed farther. They painted on cave walls, recording visions instead of memories. And when they imagined something, they made it real. Slowly, the others began to vanish. The Denisovans in the east, the Florensis on distant islands, the Neanderthals in the snow. No great battle, no sudden disaster. Just silence spreading, tribe by tribe, generation by generation. The fire of one kind of human fading as the fire of another burned brighter. Sometimes the end of a world doesn't come with an explosion. It comes with a whisper. When the last Neanderthal fell asleep by the last fire of his kind, he might have looked to the stars and wondered why they were growing quieter. He did not know that the story would go on without him. The Sapiens moved forward. They carried in their blood a trace of the others, a memory of what they had lost, even if they could never name it. And so the world became smaller, emptier, lonelier. From many, there was now one. The earth had chosen not the strongest, not the bravest, but the most curious. And as the others vanished into dust, the last human stood beneath the same stars that once watched them all. Somewhere, far beyond the firelight, the wind whispered through the grass, carrying the echoes of voices now extinct. It sounded almost like prayer. No one remembers the moment the others began to disappear. There was no single battle, no final scream in the dark. Only the slow silence that follows when a song fades and no one sings it again. For thousands of years, the earth was shared by many kinds of humans. Then, one by one, the fires went out. Maybe it began with hunger. When the game grew scarce, tribes turned on each other. The Neanderthals were strong, but strength is blind when hunger leads the way. The Sapiens had something else. They had story. They told each other that they were chosen, that the world was meant for them. They told themselves that victory was destiny, not accident. And belief can be deadlier than any weapon. In the caves of Europe, the walls filled with handprints and paint, the shapes of animals, the tracks of hunts, the first signs of art. The Neanderthals saw the same creatures, the same skies, but they did not draw them. They chased them. The Sapiens dreamed them. That difference, invisible but unstoppable, became the line between survival and extinction. The Sapiens began to hunt together with precision. They set traps, used fire, drove herds off cliffs. They planned as if the future already existed. The others reacted as if the world never changed. Nature favored the adaptable, and imagination was the ultimate adaptation. The Neanderthals were not fools. They had language, tools, and rituals. But they did not have scale. 10 could think alike. 100 could live together. But 1,000? 1,000 required faith. The Sapiens could believe in things they could not see. A spirit, a leader, a symbol, a dream. That belief united strangers, turned tribes into nations before nations had names. So when the two species met again, one carried weapons, the other carried worlds. They mated sometimes. They fought often. The snow melted. The forests changed. The ice retreated. And in that great migration of life, one branch of humanity slowly withered. By the time the stars shifted in the sky, the others were gone. The Denisovans vanished into legend. The Florensis remained only as bones on distant islands. The Neanderthals, the proud children of ice, were the last to fall. Their camps grew smaller. Their births are fewer. Their stories ended mid-sentence. And then, only silence. In that silence, the Sapiens spread farther than any creature before them, across the tundra, across the sea, into every continent. Their footprints covered the earth like a heartbeat growing louder. But every heartbeat carries the echo of what it replaced. Inside us, deep in the spiral of DNA, their ghosts remain. Fragments of another humanity, a whisper of strength, a shadow of memory. They live inside our blood, even as their names fade from our tongues. The victory was complete, but victory is not the same as peace. The earth had chosen the dreamers, and the dreamers would never rest. Sometimes when the wind moves through empty valleys, it sounds like breathing. Maybe it is the earth remembering. Maybe it is them. The Neanderthals were never truly buried. They were absorbed. Their bones lie beneath our feet, but their essence walks with us. Every time we look at fire, we see what they once saw. Every time we tell a story, we continue what they began. The others vanished, but they were never gone. They became part of us. And that is the cruel beauty of evolution. The strong die, the dreamers survive, and the world moves on, pretending it never missed them. When the last of the others were gone, the world grew quiet. For the first time in history, only one kind of human walked the earth. No more mirrors to face, no more rivals breathing the same air. Only silence, fire, and the long echo of footsteps heading into the unknown. They had won, but the victory tasted strange. Every triumph carried a shadow. Because what is the worth of being human when there are no others left to remind you what that means? The world belonged to the survivors, yet it felt emptier than before. They built new camps, lit new fires, crossed mountains and oceans, spreading like light across the dark. But wherever they went, the ghosts followed. The memory of what once was, the echo of voices that would never speak again. In their dreams, perhaps they still saw them. The tall hunters of the ice, the small climbers of the forest, the quiet eyes watching from the mist. Maybe the heart remembers what the mind forgets. Still, the sapiens moved forward. They could not stop. Survival had become their purpose, their religion, their reason for being. They began to shape the world, not because they needed to, but because they could. Every valley was a challenge, every river, a question. They wanted answers. They wanted more. The earth had given them imagination, and imagination is never satisfied. They learned to make traps from bone, needles from stone, rope from grass. They turned fur into warmth, rock into shelter, fear into faith. Each invention made life easier, but also made them hungrier for the next. They had survived hunger, cold, predators, and time itself. Now they had to survive themselves. With no other humans to compare against, they began to look inward. They asked questions that no creature had ever asked. Who are we? Why are we here? What happens when we die? In the stillness of the night, those questions burned brighter than fire. The gift of survival was not peace, it was consciousness. To be alive was no longer enough. They wanted meaning. They looked to the stars and imagined gods. They looked to the trees and saw spirits. They looked at each other and began to see souls. That was the real beginning of humanity. Not the tools, not the fire, not the hunts, but the ability to see what was invisible and believe it was real. They carried this gift like a torch. It lit their path, but it also burned their hands. Because once you know you are alive, you also know that one day you will die. The animals never thought of such things. They lived, they fought, they slept. Only humans carried the weight of tomorrow. The Neanderthals were gone, but their strength lived inside the sapiens. The Denisovans were gone, but their endurance remained. And in that fusion of memory and imagination, something new was born, a creature both ancient and young, fragile and limitless. They began to tell stories not just of the world around them, but of the world inside them. Stories of beginnings, of endings, of gods who loved and gods who destroyed. Through those stories, they found a strange comfort. Meaning gave shape to the chaos. And so they kept walking, carrying their ghosts, their fears, their dreams. The world had chosen them, but perhaps not because they deserved it. Perhaps it chose them because it needed someone to remember. The gift of survival was not victory. It was the burden of memory. They would never forget the silence that came after the others were gone. Because in that silence, humanity was born. Night after night, they gathered around the fire. The flames rose and fell like breathing. In its glow, faces appeared and disappeared, eyes bright with stories that had no beginning and no end. Fire was warmth, but it was also memory. Every spark carried a fragment of what they had seen, what they had feared, what they hoped would never return. They began to speak of the dead, not just of the fallen hunter or the lost child, but of the unseen forces that moved through the world. The fire became a bridge between what was real and what was remembered. In its light, they discovered something greater than survival. They discovered story. The world around them was harsh and unkind. The wind tore at their shelters. The rain erased their tracks. The beasts hunted without mercy. But within the circle of fire, they created something no storm could destroy. They created meaning. Each story was a thread in the fabric of memory. One person told of a great hunt. Another spoke of a dream. Someone else whispered about the stars that watched them through the smoke. And slowly, those threads wove into a tapestry that held the tribe together. Stories became law. Stories became warning. Stories became truth. Children listened wide-eyed, learning not from wounds or hunger, but from words. Words became the first tool that shaped the mind, sharper than flint, lighter than air, stronger than bone. With stories, they could live beyond the moment. A memory could outlast death. A lesson could cross generations. The fire burned, and time began. They carved lines on bones, painted on stone, pressed their hands against the cave walls, leaving behind the shapes of their souls. These were not decorations. They were declarations. Proof that they had been there. Proof that they remembered. The fire made them storytellers, and the stories made them human. But memory is not gentle. It carries both light and shadow. The same stories that gave them courage also gave them fear. They began to imagine what they could not see. Spirits that watched. Gods that punished. The unknown became sacred, and the sacred became powerful. The first myths were born, not written in books or carved in stone, but spoken in trembling voices while the wind howled outside. They believed that the fire had a soul, that the river listened, that the mountain was alive. And maybe, in a way, it was. Because through those beliefs, they learned reverence. They learned caution. They learned that not everything could be controlled. The fire of memory gave them wisdom, but it also gave them longing. Once they could imagine more, they began to want more. More safety, more meaning, more power. Every story was a spark, and sparks always look for something to burn. Their minds grew restless. They looked beyond the circle of fire, to the forest, the river, the stars. They wanted to understand it all. But knowledge comes with a price. The more they remembered, the less they could forget. And memory can be a heavy thing to carry. Still, they kept the fire alive. They guarded it, fed it, passed it from hand to hand like the heartbeat of their kind. Because as long as the fire burned, they were not alone. As long as they told their stories, they were still human. The fire of memory would follow them everywhere. Through storms, through hunger, through centuries. It would light their path and consume their peace. But that was the trade. To remember is to suffer. To suffer is to live. And to live is to keep the fire burning. The fire had given them memory, and memory had given them dreams. But dreams have a way of becoming hungry. They began to look at the world differently. The mountains were no longer just stone. The rivers were no longer just water. Everything had a name, and everything with a name could be claimed. They had learned to survive. Now they wanted to control. A seed of ambition began to grow in the human heart. It started small, like a whisper. If we can command the fire, why not the world? They began to see patterns in the stars and meaning in the weather. They started to believe that they were chosen, that the earth itself had been made for them. The same imagination that once kept them safe now told them they were destined for more. And destiny is a dangerous idea. They tamed animals, not just to eat, but to own. They watched plants grow and wondered if they could make them grow where they wished. They built traps not only for beasts, but for the world itself. Each discovery fed the next. Each success deepened the hunger. They were no longer content to follow the rhythms of nature. They wanted to write their own. The first walls appeared, small circles of stones that said, "This is ours." The first boundaries were drawn, not on maps, but in the mind. They had once belonged to the earth. Now they wanted the earth to belong to them. They began to count time, measure distance, and mark the passing of seasons. Numbers replaced instincts. Control replaced wonder. The same mind that had imagined gods now began to imagine power. They built idols, carved from bone and wood, and spoke to them as if they were listening. Maybe they were praying. Maybe they were talking to themselves. The need to believe became the need to rule. The moment they understood that one story could unite 100 hearts, they also realized it could command them. And so, leadership was born. The storyteller became the chief. The priest became the judge. The myth became the law. Ambition had given them order, but it had also given them hierarchy. What began as faith turned into structure. What began as hope turned into control. Yet the fire still burned. They still looked at the sky, still whispered to the stars, still asked for meaning in the silence of night. Ambition did not kill their spirit. It gave it purpose. They wanted more than to live. They wanted to matter. That desire would push them beyond the forests and rivers, across oceans, into empires, into cities, into machines. But it all began here, when the first human looked at the world and thought, "It can be mine." The birth of ambition was the birth of civilization, and also the beginning of its curse. Because every wall that keeps danger out also keeps freedom in. Every field that feeds you ties you to its soil. Every victory makes you afraid to lose. Ambition is fire given form. It lights the dark. It also burns whatever holds it. And still, they reached for it. They could not stop. They would build, they would conquer, they would dream higher and fall harder. The story of ambition would become the story of humanity itself. The moment they believed they could shape the world, they forgot that the world had shaped them first. And so they walked forward, eyes full of light, hearts full of hunger, unaware that their greatest creation would one day become their greatest trap. They had conquered the wild. They had silenced the beasts, tamed the fire, named the stars. But in the quiet that followed, something else began to speak. It was not the wind or the earth. It was the echo of all the others who were gone, the ones who had shared this planet before them. Their voices were faint, carried through time like dust in sunlight. They asked no questions, demanded no revenge. They simply whispered the truth. That survival is not the same as wisdom. That progress is not the same as peace. Humanity listened, but only for a moment. Then it built new fires, told new stories, made new gods. Because silence is unbearable when you are alone. The world had chosen the dreamers. And dreamers do not stop. From the caves to the cities, from the stones to the stars. They would keep reaching, keep burning, keep imagining. The cost did not matter. The fire had already been lit. Tonight, when you look up at the sky, remember this. There was a time when the world held many kinds of humans. Now there is only one. The others are gone, but their story still moves through your veins. Their strength is your heartbeat. Their memory is your shadow. We are their echo. We are their dream. We are the last voice left to speak for all of them. And as long as we keep dreaming, the story of humanity is not over.